Okay. I just spent a couple of minutes just going through this picture and how I did it. Just to say, I think at the outset that I would say I'm a beginner at Bromoil. I've got quite a lot of experience in the darkroom. I've got my own darkroom, but in terms of bromoiling, I've been trying to do bromoils for about a year and a bit, mostly unsuccessful because of the papers. Managed to get some Lewis paper and beginning to understand the brushing technique for that paper. And this particular image, I did this last week. I've had a few attempts at it. The image itself is of an abandoned farm in North Wales. It's quite an important image for me. It sits on a drover's road from North Wales to Birmingham and onto London. So in the earlier part of the 19th, 18th and 17th centuries and earlier, cows, steers were driven from London, from North Wales all the way down to London for market. And this old abandoned farm sits on one of those drovers' roads. And it was the subject of a series of photographs by Faye Godwin, who's one of our most sort of famous photographers from the 1980s and 1990s. And she wrote a few books about the drovers' roads. And this area featured in one of her books, although not this particular image. So I walked the drovers' roads with my Hasselblad, and this is one of the images that I took. Actually, I revisited this place last year, and that tree is no longer there. It's fallen down. It was as a result of one of the storms we had last year. So you can't take this image anymore, which is one of the great things about photography, I think.
Tony, did you cut the tree down just to make sure nobody could?
Yeah, something like that. So I just sort of spent a few minutes talking about picture selection, and then on about the process that I went through to get this image, both the production of a print and the brushing. I strive for pictures with strong highlights, although this particular image doesn't show that. I think the sort of essence of good pictorial images lies in the highlights very often. And therefore, I think for producing a traditional bromoil print, one is always trying to tame contrast. And that's one of the skills required in sort of producing the negative that will, and the print, which will eventually end up producing a bromoilable image. And there's a few techniques that I use for trying to tame contrast. The first one really is in camera. So for my Hasselblad and for my Nikon film camera, I use a diffuser, which fits as on the lens, and I meter for the shadows and find and stop down to a zone 1 through a diffuser. I take the image, if it's high contrast, I take the image, and then I superimpose on top of that image my shot. And that way the film has been pre-exposed to a very small amount of light. And that helps, I think, tame the contrast a little. And I also use...
Do I understand? So are you like flash the film basically?
Yes, effectively it's flashing. Yeah, pre-flash. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That.
So for any negative where there's more than say 9 or 10 zones, as it were, using the old zone terminology, I would probably pre-flash the film or pre-flash the paper.
Okay.
The other thing sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the idea of flashing generally is a non-image forming exposure. But what happens in printing with delicate highlights or in a negative with delicate shadow detail is there's an inertia involved where those tones won't develop, and giving them just that extra little kick of exposure that's not enough exposure to fog the paper, the negative, tends to give those a little kick that gives them a little oomph to get them up into a developable state, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely right.
Specifically the shadows.
Well, it's really I think what you're trying, what you end up doing, because when you're taking a shot, you're effectively compressing, I think, the range of tonal values on the image slightly.
That's cool.
Austin, if you don't have Ansel Adams' book on a negative, get a hold of it because he talks about pre-flashing the film in that book.
Oh, right. Okay. I have got it, but it's a long time since I read it. I'll probably dig it out again.
I struggle so much with staying awake while reading his books, man. They knock me out for some reason.
Well, but if you want a current book that really goes into great detail about how black and white film and paper works way beyond monochrome, gets updated every couple years. It's a big coffee table book. It's about a car payment to buy it these days.
That's why I've been putting that off. It's on my.
I think most of the updates are more for digital negatives and hybrid digital analog processes. So a used copy, I've seen them for $20, and it's a really great, more modern book to really understand how exposure and development works and finding your personal ISO, and whether you want to do that with a densitometer and graph paper or in a more just real world way. It has about 3 methods to determine ISO and development time based on how technical you want to get with it. So sorry to interrupt, Tony, but just on the subject of books, that's a really good one to have. It
is good. I've got that. It is an excellent book, I thought. Although I think it's becoming more and more digital as each edition comes through, you know. The other thing, of course, I do is to do with the selection of film and the way in which the film is developed. So if it is a high contrast, I tend to use 2 camera bodies if I'm using 35mm, so that I can produce, so I can differentiate between N- and N+ development to some extent. So like a half zone system. And I'll use for high, sometimes I'll use XP2, for example, for high contrast images, or I'll use a compensating developer when I get to develop the image, maybe a 2-bath developer, like Barry Thornton or something like that. So that's really sort of about the sort of the in-camera stuff.
Sorry, real quick, do you remember what film you shot this on?
I think this is HP5 actually. I think from memory.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you remember what the conditions were like, lighting wise, cloud wise, things like that?
I can show you. I can share with you. Can you see this other image that I've done?
Did I see it?
How many images can you see? Just 1 or 2?
Oh, just 1.
Okay, I've got another image here to show you. Actually, it doesn't show you the conditions. I mean, it was slightly overcast, grey sort of a day, not much sun. It was just dull and slightly wet.
Yeah.
Slightly windy. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So the next stage really was to go down the process of developing it, which I think I did. I think I used Barry Thornton 2-bath on this one. And then I obviously printed it on Lewis paper. So my technique there would be to, I tend to print from the midtones, and then I work the shadows and the highlights through masking or through burning. That's how I tend to do my pictures. And in this particular in this particular situation, I think I added about a 30% development time after I got the print looking in a satisfactory state. And that's one of my problems, I think, because you do all this work getting the print just right, and then you add this rather notional 30% exposure to get it to the level of tonality that will accept ink at a later stage. And I find that rather, that whole business rather subjective, I guess, not as objective as I'd like it to be.
Well, and I commented earlier in the group that sometimes it takes an ugly print to get a beautiful bromoil. And it really is that you're at it, you get your print dialed in perfectly, and then you want to drop the contrast or add a lot of density. And it can be very disconcerting to look at the print you're going to bleach and be like, geez, this is not attractive.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose as long as you've got the relative values earlier, you get the relative values, so that when you add your 30, 40, or 50% or whatever it is to enable the printing the bromoiling process to work, you're at least affecting all of it by the same amount. So the relative amounts still remain in proportion to each other. So then I bleach, and currently I'm using Gilbert's solution. I bleach using 10% Gilbert's for 10 minutes, constant agitation in a dim room, which I think is fairly normal.
Quick question on that. They talk about always doing the bleaching in a dim room. Why is that?
Well, I think there's no real reason that I do it that way. I think I've heard people do it in normal daylight.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the picture's subject to fogging still.
Yeah, it's a rehalogenating bleach. So there is a belief like that if enough strong light hits it, that it will add exposure. And
Really?
it's certainly the kind of thing you could test. But you know, if we tested all the stuff we should test, we'd do nothing but test. So
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was under the assumption that once it's developed and fixed, then that's that. The only thing left to do is to be able to bleach it out, that it couldn't go any further on development.
well, Tim Rudman in one of his toning books showed where he had bleached prints and put them in a water bath where they overlapped, and the toning was very different in straight lines, that somehow light hitting the print had affected the toning step, which is a redevelopment process.
Okay.
So he spoke in his book about taking a little more care in the way you wash the prints and so on. Now, would that same effect happen? Bromoil is not a redevelopment. It's you know, using the fact that wet gelatin rejects oil-based ink. So I don't know, would you see that or not? But it's for I'm with Tony, where you might as well turn off the light over the sink. You know, it's not working in absolute darkness, but I don't want to that this indeed is a factor. So
yeah. And at this stage, I've got one of two choices. Once I've bleached it, I wash it for about 10 minutes, get rid of the bleach and the yellow color. And then on some prints, before fixing, I'll redevelop again, partially. I'm still experimenting with it. And that's to alter the contrast. And I'll redevelop using 2 baths. So I might redevelop in a very dilute solution of developer. And then once the blacks start coming in, I'll put it into a water bath and just without any agitation, and then just let the highlights catch up. So I'm experimenting with that at the moment, but my normal route, as per this picture, is I then, after washing, I fix in ordinary fixer, and I fix for 10 minutes. And then I wash again.
So the 10-minute fixing, are you using just thiosulfate versus a rapid fixer?
No, I'm just using thiosulfate.
Okay.
And I think I use 12%. Yeah, 12.5%, I think it is. And then I let it dry overnight normally. And then when I come to brush work, I dry it with a hairdryer, super dry it for I think it's about 90 seconds. And then I soak, and I'm still playing around with the soaking times. I think the normal soak time for Lewis paper at 22 or 23 degrees is 15 to 20 minutes. So that's where I started. But I found that reducing the soaking time helps to bring the blacks in much more heavily, which is what I did with this particular version of this print. So this particular print, the first inking used 15 to 20 minutes. I think it was about 15 minutes at 22 degrees. And then I inked it. Then I let it dry. And then the next day, I did a second inking after a 5-minute 26 or 27 degree soak. So I'm playing with the temperatures and playing with the soak times a little. I've used hog hair and Fitch brushes on this image and nothing else, apart from the highlights on the stones on the wall, where I also used cotton wool and warm water to get rid of some of the ink. I think there are 4 inkings on this one over about 3 days.
So you only
I
do.
find it very hard to judge when to stop. And the best way for me to do it is to sleep on it and look at it the next day and say, actually, this could do with a bit more ink. I think I've slightly overdone the ink on the house, but that's my personal view on it. And that's basically it. It's a fairly standard process that I'm still trying to learn.
What about the sky, Tony? How have you done the sky? With what type of brush?
Yeah, the sky. The sky is a problem for me, actually. I'm still struggling with skies. I've done a few where I've added clouds using bits of paper and brushing over the paper. And I've burnt the image when developing the print. So yeah, when exposing the print, I've also burnt the skies to try and produce cloud or some tonality in the sky. And I found my work on the skies at the moment is pretty poor. And I think the skies are really important, particularly in landscape. So this image suffers from the fact that there's very little in the sky. And luckily the tree helps to helps in the fact that the sky is poor. But skies are a problem at the moment for me.
Tony, you mentioned masking and printing. Are you using like a pin registration mask system in the lithofilm and so on? Or did you mean more of like cutting a burn card out of paper kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm just cutting out cards out of paper and just having enough of a penumbra by having the card quite high up so that it doesn't have a very fixed edge.
Yeah, here in Texas, all summer long, you can go weeks without seeing a single cloud. And so I've shot reams of cool cloud negatives, and I finally got the Lin Radica masking kit.
Yeah.
It's no fun to work 35 millimeter with that, but with medium format or 4x5, it can be pretty simple to drop a dramatic sky into a shot without using any scans or pixels. It's not for everyone. You have to have an obsessive mindset that's damn it, I'm going to figure this out. And after 30 blown prints, you finally get it. But it's crazy powerful, and especially for the basic contrast control it's designed for. But it's also really cool for image compositing. Again, it's a $500 setup or so, and it adds this whole new learning curve to what you do. So, you know, I acknowledge it is a total not for everyone thing to get into, but I just got always sick of blank skies.
Yeah, I've been looking at Lin's, the Lin's technology. I think I'd rather do that and go down the digital route.
Well, I'm curious how many people have a no pixels in the darkroom rule. I do digital video and photography all day, and so I like the challenge of not using any of those things in the darkroom.
Yeah.
But yeah, at some point, if we ever want to do a Zoom call about masking systems and how they work, I'm not a great expert in it, but I've been doing it about 5 years with a lot of success. So
That's great, Michael. You just volunteered for the next call.
That's cool.
I'm actually about to complete an insane print that's 5 images to make one cohesive sort of narrative images, and I am videoing all the steps of it. So maybe in a month or so that we can go through that. It would be fun.
So
just to wrap up, I'm having problems with skies, so I need to practice with that.
But Tony, I think the sky looks great in this. The tree really fills the space.
I think for this particular image, you know, there seems to be a bit of an overabundance of discussion around skies and the importance of them. And I think in a lot of images is true, but in this one, what is of interest is the tree and the building. And so I don't feel that there's lacking from not having the sky, because at that point, typically you might have clouds that would be behind the tree, and then that would just feel cluttered in my opinion. So I think it was actually good that you had a clear sky this day, because it really allows me to sink into the detail in the tree, like the shadow area on the inside of the cabin there, the cottage, where I can still make out some of the brickwork in that shadow, you know, below the chimney. I think that's stellar.
Yeah, my top takeaway from this image is once again the choice of image and negative for Bromoil is half of the process. You know, if you just take some weird snapshot of your street and make a Bromoil of it, you're not going to get this that Bromoil gives you. You know, it's a great composition. It's a great subject. And have you guys all watched the Norman Greispiert videos on YouTube of his?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He was a master, but he was a master of shooting and framing and composing for his end process. And that's a huge part of what makes his stuff work. And if you had told me this was a Greispiert print, I would have believed you. So I don't know if I could give a better compliment than that.
Right.
I tell you the other thing I'm having problems with is edges. I mean, it's very scruffy. I burn the edges when I print the image so that the edges will take more ink. So particularly where I have a featureless sky, but I'm struggling with getting neat edges at the minute. I think that's just I probably just need to be a bit more fussy about how I do it.
But I love the edges on this print. They say it's a bromoil. They say it's an alt process, and they say it in a way that doesn't distract from the print. All these kids getting into film and scanning these days, and they're scanning the film borders to say, look, I really shot it with film. It's hugely distracting, but I think this is subtle and beautiful. I never try and do clean borders. I'm like, I'm at it. You know, it's too much.
What is the size, Tony?
It's. Can you still see me? I think it's got it. It's 7.5 by 7.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the issue I have with the Lewis paper. Why doesn't he have 16 by 20?
Yeah, it's a drag, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what's led a lot of us to the FOMA and the liquid emulsions, is to get bigger prints.
That's why I just bought this FOMA 112 in 11 by 14 and give it a shot. That's my next step up from 8 by 10. We'll see.
Yeah. Do you know where his paper is made?
He keeps it secret as far as I know.
Yeah, I've tried to get it out of him.
I don't know if he just bought a truckload of paper and keeps it in a freezer, but some chemistry photo guy told me that the issue with, if you've got some beautiful old AGFA MCC and it isn't fogged, that inked great 7 years ago and now it doesn't, that there's something about cross-linking of the polymers or something like that even refrigeration or freezing won't prevent. So I don't know how true that is. I just know I have some papers that used to ink like crazy and now they don't. But that I've never gone into 20-minute soaking times, and that's something I'm really curious about. With the foam emulsion, a 3-minute soak, you pull it and blot it, and it looks like you're looking at a coin. You can see the image in 3D relief. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's like looking at a carbon print.
Yeah, it's crazy. It looks like your highlights are about a 1/16 of an inch off the paper.
Yeah, the Lewis stuff doesn't swell like that, at least not in my experience.
He says it does in his description. I've never tried it. He says a coin-like relief, but
It has a slight relief. Yeah, that's slight.
Yeah.
But I was doing a redevelopment test with the new Ilford RC, and I bleached it and tanned it to redevelop it. And I looked at it in the light, and I could see the image in relief. Now I don't know if I think RC paper is just going to be too slippery to ink weld, but I was kind of surprised that the current Ilford RC did really swell.
Yeah.
Tony, question about your the highlights here. So like on the rock wall that is closest to camera, when you did your first 1 or 2 rounds, were those highlights completely white? Did you have to go in with like a softer ink and a pitch brush to like bring a little bit of detail in there, or did it just kind of happen all on its own?
The first couple of inkings they were pretty light. I bumped up the temperature. I think on the third inking, and they accepted. So sorry, I reduced the temperature and reduced the soaking time, and they accepted more ink. I think it's that way around.
It's all about how much water the highlights are holding, I imagine.
Yeah.
Relates to how much ink they reject.
So I think if you have higher temperature or a longer soak, they reject more.
Right.
Because it swells more.
And this is something I've really wondered about redevelopment of the matrix before fixing. Is there a developer that'll allow you to, that'll first the weakest areas will come in. You know, there doesn't seem to be a redevelopment where you can just get some highlight tonality without getting a lot of shadow tonality.
I think you can use catechol.
Yeah, with like a
very,
low
very-
agitation where the developer exhausts in the shadows very quickly, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to use 2 baths. So I think you can use catechol, very dilute, one to 50, I think it is, from memory. And as soon as the blacks start to become slightly visible, you whack it into a water bath and then just leave it.
Right.
I think it does. It apparently works. I don't know whether it works for bromoiling. I don't know whether the difference is sufficient for it to work for bromoiling.
Yeah.
And Tony, are you primarily using the Barry Thornton developer now, or do you still mix things up?
I use a thing. I use largely. I use a developer that based on Selectel Soft, so a soft developer, metol based, no hydroquinone at all, because I think hydroquinone is essentially a high contrast developer, isn't it?
So do you notice very much of a difference with that 2 bath developer in the contrast?
When I'm doing the print, the negative, and the print I do, yeah.
Really?
So when I'm doing the negative, I'm a real fan of Barry Thornton 2 bath. If you're using 35mm photography and you've got a variety of images, all with different ranges of tonality on them, then I think the only way you can really control those highlights is by a 2 bath developer. So that's why I use it.
Has anyone experimented with the slamped processing, which is pre-bleaching the film or the paper before developing? It's got some monstrous power when you dial it in, but it's what it does varies with any film developer or paper developer combination. So you need a lot of testing to dial it in, but it works. You bleach the latent image back before developing, and it's an extremely dilute ferrocyanide or ferrocyanide and bromide mixture. And there's a really good PDF available online, but you know, you could make a print like this and decide you want to open up the blacks half stop without affecting the highlights in the print. And it takes some testing to dial in, but it uses chemicals most of us have, and a very tiny amount of those chemicals. But I started experimenting with it for negs just because of, again, in Texas, the scene range you can have during the day with the intensity of the sun. So it's a way to knock back highlights in a negative without compressing development, where you can really blast a lot of light into your shadows and mids and get a ton of separation. And then it's like you shave the highlights off in the developing step. And it's very repeatable. You can do enough tests to say, oh, I want to knock a half stop or a stop off my highs. It'll take this long to do it. But there's excellent documentation online. If you Google SLIMT.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Latent image manipulation technique. So, anyway, it's another one of those rabbit holes you can go down, but in my initial testing of it, it's got some crazy power. You can basically make big shifts in the grade of your paper with it as far as contrast reduction.
I mean, the other thing about this image is I see that the Lewis paper comes out quite blue-black. I did this image on a paper called Finesse about 3 or 4 months ago. And it was a paper that I acquired, it's no longer made. And it actually bromoils really, really well. But it comes out slightly I think it's a chlorobromo paper rather than a bromide paper. So it comes out slightly warmer. And I think this Lewis paper comes out quite blue-black. And I'd quite like to investigate. I'd quite like to investigate toning bromoils. Not using coloured inks, but toning the paper.
Yeah.
So more like dyeing the paper base to a
Slightly
cooler tone.
I've done that in the past. It's not, I don't know if it's considered proper toning, but I've taken the image, bleached it, had the matrix, and then did like a coffee toning.
Yeah.
It just to knock down the paper, warm it up a little bit, and then go through and ink it. And I thought it looked great. I
guess you can consider that more a dyeing than a tone.
Yeah.
That's right.
But there's probably a potential to use things like really dilute watercolor or get some of the fabric dyes from the fabric store and experiment with that.
Yeah.
So from an archival standpoint, would that be a no-no to use like tea or coffee or things like that to dye the paper?
Well, I don't know. You think of, watercolor paintings, last forever if you keep them out of direct sunlight or put them behind UV glass. And that's with the things I'm doing where I'm rephotographing a bromoil and then printing it on canvas with liquid emulsion and tinting the canvas with water-based and then oil paints and varnishing it. So and Tony, to clarify that, like if you took this print and shot say a 4x5 neg of it, spread liquid emulsion on canvas, then reprint it on the canvas, and you have to do a few tests because it's another generation of print. So you want to watch for plugged up shadows or blown highs and so on. Fairly simple to go through a couple shots of testing on scraps, and then actually tinting, the way anyone would tint a photograph. Though on canvas, I use really thinned out oil paints. And when those paints dry, then I varnish the canvas. And it's really for one thing, it looks about a foot deep when you get that varnish on it. But the reaction of the viewer is like, wait, is this an old master's painting or is this a photograph or, what the heck is this? But again, it gets you into that, what methods do you have at hand for toning or colorizing an image? And, are they archival or are they not? But in my view, I prime the canvas with an oil painting ground. I'm not using house paint. So, I'm looking to materials that you would expect would last for a painter or something like that.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's where I was looking into the doing like a 4-color bromoil transfer is what I'm looking at now. And so using the color filters on the black and white film, so I can create the different color isolated negs, and then see about doing a 4-color transfer. And I think it's going to take me about 6 or 7 months to.
I've had this thought about doing that kind of work and shooting E6, where you'd have to have your E6 game down to have your contrast well controlled, but on a cloudy day or a day like this print, and then sticking that E6 positive in the enlarger or contact printing with your colored filters to make each negative, which seems like you could keep your negatives in really tight registration that way versus going like shooting, 4 negs with color filters at the actual setting. And I've never experimented with this, but it struck me as, well, you need a color image and you need to use the filters to break it down into these specific plates. And but so why not shoot E6 and then be able to do all your filtering in the darkroom?
So why would it have to be E6 and not C?
Because it's positive.
Right. So if I have the positive film and I'm shooting through it, then I get a negative on the paper. Oh, I See, I see.
You don't need a interpause or any other steps. You know,
Huh.
it struck me like this could be a really simpler way than doing all your filtering out in the field. And that no matter what camera you use, I don't think those negatives are gonna be in really tight registration. You're gonna have to register them by eye.
Right.
If you had E6 and some kind of pin registered contact printing setup, which you could make very simply by, you know, taping a little scrap of film to your E6 positive, punching that, putting some silkscreen pins on glass and so on, that at least you would have your separation negatives could then be perfectly registered. So I don't know, I was thinking of it more as a way
Crazy. Yeah.
to composite images to shoot on a blue screen or a green screen, because my images, I'm making these scale modeled backgrounds and compositing human beings into a fake set and so on. And I don't know if I'm going too far afield of our discussion, but it was one of those middle of the nights. Well, what if you just shot at E6 and then did your separation negs that way? I think it's a promising direction for someone with a lot of time on their hands.
Guys, may I cut in?
Oh, please.
Yeah. First time in the meeting, and sorry for coming late into the meeting, and sorry for not saying hi before, but the house is just now coming to a rest. We have had a family birthday party downstairs, and the smallest one is just now being put to bed. So I'm Terje, Norwegian, pretty new at Bromoil. I'm still on the basics with choosing ink, knowing anything about ink, knowing about the correct papers. I've tried out the Fuma Brom 113 and started to not master but get decent results, and now I cannot get that anymore. So I've also ordered 112. So, but in a smaller format. I as you started with the 11x14 because I hope hard and I fall hard. So and I don't have a good washing solution. So when I bleach, it's one paper or at most two papers going through that production line. So I'm working very slowly, but that's okay. I've never seen physically anybody making a bromoil. I've just seen the videos from the guy you referred to, Gary Speed or something like that,
Yeah,
and many others, and of course they are incredibly inspiring. But I have to ask myself, how does this picture look that you are choosing, the exposure you are choosing, versus a picture that you would print for display? I think I'm getting there, but there are so many questions. I don't think I have much to contribute with knowledge and test results, but mostly being here to learn and yeah,
All right, I'm
showing
on
my
the
face.
video link.
Say that again, Dave.
It's all right. The wife's just walked in and disturbed me. Sorry, I'm sorry I'm late, but I've been messing around trying to get the iPad to work, and I'll tell you what, if Steve Jobs was around, he'd get it inserted sideways.
Yeah. We had you. Were you on the computer the last call?
Yeah, I was. I've had to transfer back to the PC now.
Well, it'd be good to get good to see these results on this Unibrom, is it, paper? Be nice to see those results.
Yeah, that's a popular lith paper. It's one of the few lith papers that's still in production, and I was surprised to see people getting good results on the Unibrom. I think I'm thinking of the right paper. It's like a Russian or Ukrainian paper.
Slavic Unibrom.
Yes.
Yeah, 112. Yeah.
No, it's Slavic Unibrom 160. The 112 is Foma.
Yeah.
Foma Brom.
And you guys, you know how Ilford every year has their large format film thing where you can get 20 by 24 HP5 or whatever. They have this yearly order for large format shooters where you can fill your freezer up, you know, where they don't cut the film into 4x5, they cut it into great big sheets and you pre-order. Why can't we get Ilford to do that once a year and make a non-hardened, non-super coated paper that would work for Bromoil and for Lith? If they would take like the multigrade 4 warm tone formula and do a yearly thing. I mean, should we all just bombard them between Bromoil and I think Bromoil and Lith printers could both benefit from a matte paper. I think the things that prevent Bromoil also prevent Lith printing. And would Ilford hook us up? I kind of doubt it, but
it's worth a try. I think because from my experience, it seems like there's a lot more Lith printers out there than Bromoil.
Yeah.
If you rally that audience, some type of petition and say, hey,
yeah, Lith, you're done when it hits the stop bath. You know, Bromoil, you haven't even started.
Bromoil is a next level of insanity.
Yeah, but you know, Lith was what got me back into film photography. I was looking for something more pictorial. I was tired of the control of digital, and so it was really Lith and Bromoil. And then I got into Bromoil, and then I got way into the contrast control of Lith and so on. And now I'm like, what? There's no reason you couldn't Bromoil a Lith print, I would think. You know, I need to test that sometime.
In answer to your question about contacting Ilford, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, in answer to your question, when Kentmere were active, the Bromoil Circle got them to run off a one-off of Kentmere document, or it was a Bromoil paper, but we had it the emulsion on the reverse side, which hadn't got any texture. And Kentmere, a relatively small company, did that. We've tried asking around Ilford and people, and I think they're just too big, and the demand is just too small from the Bromoil users.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Moberly and I've been around their site, and I've been into the area where they make the paper and the film, and it's, you know, it's quite, for them to interrupt there, it's like a long process. They'd have to interrupt the process, insert a new small process where they're not going to make any money. They're going to lose money, effectively.
Well, and meanwhile, the poly warm tone project that
that's stopped, isn't it?
Well, it got sidetracked by like Brexit and the pandemic, and now they're selling the emulsion. But
Oh, right.
but there's a video where they've got the old Ilford machine up and running, and they were coating paper. Tim Rudman tested the paper and liked it. The polywarm, it was ADOX is doing that, and they said Lith printers in particular would be excited. But I think they're only making a gloss paper, which I assume could be problematic.
Yeah. I mean, I paid a deposit thinking I would get some paper eventually. This was a couple of years ago.
Right. It's
but never heard anything back.
and there's a video where this really cute girl goes into the coating factory and they take her through all the machinery and how the machine is loaded with emulsion, and the guy calls it ice cream. And she leaves with a pack of paper, and Freestyle is selling just the polywarm tone emulsion. My understanding is the factory that makes the emulsion has to transport it across an international boundary to the coating plant. And that's something between the pandemic and Brexit, I don't know, was the thing I heard 2 years ago. But that situation you'd think would be resolved now, and ADOX hasn't posted anything new on their site about it. But and it may be a moot point for Bromoil anyway. I mean, if we want big prints, we may just have to get really good at coating papers.
So a quick question on that, because I attempted to coat my own paper once and somehow exposed it. And I'm not sure if it was the light that I was using, the red light. I'm using an LED. Red light is my safe light. Michael, I know that you do a lot of coding yourself.
Yeah, and I'm using that red super bright LED that's really become popular in North America. And it's a $3 bulb that goes in any standard socket. I've got 5 of them in my darkroom. It's like noon on Mars in there. It's fantastic. If you drop something, you just pick it up. You're not padding around the floor.
Yeah.
Where'd my burn tool go? Oh, there it is. But
when you're coding, are you doing multiple coats?
no, my big thing has been to try and get a absolutely perfect coating, because I'm going for a roller inking that is not as stippled as a brush inking. I'm going for something a little more photographic. And but when I do it right, it's a 3-minute soak and I'm done inking in 4 minutes. It's pretty spectacular. I assume you could brush and get a more heavy bromoil look the same way, but it's been a long process of, I was just fixing out fiber paper and coating on the back, because it's a machine plate surface where the paper doesn't impart any texture. And even like Arche Platine, I felt was too much texture. And but I was doing a gelatin coat with a glass rod, and then hardened gelatin, letting that dry, and then coating with the foam on a glass rod. But I found the look I'm looking for, any like imperfections in thickness really leap out of the print of an over inked or a reject the ink area. And I think I finally, like, what I'm doing is taking a Bristol paper, soaking it in hot water. I put it on glass and I tape it down with watercolor painter's tape and let it dry. So I'm dry coating with paper that is absolutely flat
Stretched.
and
Yeah.
will not come up. But if I do a gelatin subcoat, the paper can wrinkle and actually pull loose of the tape, because the force of that paper getting wet and shrinking. So my last few tests, I've just been masking it off and spraying it with polyurethane satin spray, coat it, light sanding, coat, like 5 coats of that stuff. And so that's been promising. But I was coating on the back of fixed out fiber paper, but you can't dry that on a piece of glass. It's just glue when it dries. You absolutely cannot get it off the glass. So, but one thing that never occurred to me was fix it out and just coat right on top of the existing emulsion and gelatin. It's not that thick. Obviously it doesn't swell on soaking, or we'd use it. So that, I think that'll be my next testing I do is.
Well, for what it's worth, I've tried that before.
Really?
It failed miserably for me.
Really? What went wrong with it?
I had a package of Kent Mere paper that was fogged. And so I fixed it out and then tried coating it. And I do the glass rod coating process. I use 6 wraps of Mylar tape, so I get a pretty thick coating on it. The problem is that the paper base on the Kent Mere paper, which I thought was fairly heavy, wrinkled so much when the emulsion cured and dried that it was unusable. The interesting thing, this is what I did not expect, because I tried making a few prints out of it, silver prints out of it with the liquid emulsion. The interesting thing was the Kent Mere paper was glossy finished paper. When I coated it with a liquid emulsion, I got a sort of a glossy print out of the foam of liquid emulsion on the Kent Mere paper, which I did not expect. I tried coating it on the backside of the paper too, had the same problems, as the stuff wrinkled up so badly that it was unusable. So, and you would normally think a double weight photo paper is heavy enough, but when the emulsion cures, it shrinks the paper up so much that it just didn't work at all.
And so I wonder if that watercolor tape idea would glue it down enough.
I don't think so. I think it might pull it right off the glass. Might pull the tape right off the glass.
Yeah, but when I've coated, like the last coating I did on the polyurethane subbed paper, the bottom of the tape did come loose. It gets a little damp from the emulsion, I guess, and it came up, but it was, as long as the coating was perfect, an hour or 2 hours later, it starts to wrinkle and buckle and come loose, but I can flatten that paper back out when it's dry. And so I'm about to print, hopefully today and tomorrow, a 16 by 20 of that test. So I'll let you guys know how it goes. But like the most beautiful photo paper I've ever worked with was Foma emulsion on Canson inkjet paper with the Burita coating. It made the most gorgeous prints, but the Burita was too slippery to ink. The ink just slid around on it. So it was, again, the quality of the blacks, and I guess the amount of silver in that paper was just stunning, but it didn't ink that well. It made pretty prints. So.
A question regarding the liquid emulsion. I've tried for normal silver prints the Foma emulsion on watercolor paper, the Fabriano Artistico, and I like the surface. It's not perfect coatings. I struggle with that as well. But can I use this paper with this process because it's buffered with calcium carbonate?
You can get rid of the calcium carbonate.
Say again?
Are you saying, I mean, if you're, certainly some alt process workers get rid of the carbonate process, the calcium carbonate, by using, I think they use succinic acid.
Yeah, I'll try that. I can try both to see what happens without and with thank you.
Well,
for what it's worth, the three papers that I use for the liquid emulsion, I haven't used the Fabriano before, but I use primarily Arches Platine, Hanemuli Platinum Rag, and Burger Cot 320. So
I have the Burger Cot 160 at hand, so that's that would be neutral, I think.
If you've got 160 weight on it, it's going to be pretty thin. It's going to buckle a lot when it cures.
So interestingly, you say the paper buckles. Kirk Toft has been using the backside of Kentmere document art for quite a number of years for his transfers. So I think it depends on what you're coating it with, and he's using gelatin as opposed to a liquid emulsion, but he don't get any problems with buckling. So interesting.
Well, and calcium carbonate, I think it depends on what process you're using. Does that chemical interact with the other chemicals in the process? And so I guess your question would be, does it affect the bleaching and tanning, or does it affect the ink? And the fastest way to find out is do a little test and see if it works. So
there's that word again.
Yeah. Test. I always say it three times in a row. Test.
And real quick, Dan, when you coat, are you doing a gelatin layer before the emulsion, or are you just doing the emulsion straight on paper?
Straight on paper.
Okay. And have you run one of your workshops yet?
Yes.
Oh, nice. How did it go?
Went very well.
Awesome.
Only I can handle up to 3 people in my dark room. I got a big dark room, but only one person signed up for it, so he got a one-on-one session. So it worked out really well.
Nice.
And this is the Foma workshop with going through the process of coating with Foma and printing and inking.
Yeah, doing the inking with sponges, because I don't do the brush techniques like you guys, the rest of you guys do.
Well, and that was Gandolfi or what's the guy's name?
Emil Schilt.
Yeah, was I've seen the video where he's tearing all the foam out of an old couch and pensively smoking a cigarette and inking and pensively smoking a cigarette. And
it's funny, you look at the half a dozen videos on YouTube for him, and half the time he's sitting there drinking his coffee and smoking a cigarette, pondering and looking at a print.
I know.
That is exactly how all Americans do Europeans.
Yeah.
Coffee and cigarettes and art. I
really wonder if I bought a little beret, would my inking get easier? You know,
I think your quality would go up immediately, wouldn't it?
Well, what's amazing in watching that is that when he's applying the ink, so I've started using some foam as well, specifically on portraits. But when he's like dabbing the pounding the ink in with the sponge, you can see the image appearing as if you were like actually hammering with a brush. But I'm like, that is not how it works whenever I'm using the foam. I can coat with it, and then I can use it it works really well for me for removing.
Are you double coating when you brush coat it with foam?
No, I'm just using the David Lewis paper on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't think the sponge technique works very well on commercial paper. And
Oh,
I
interesting.
think the problem, because I've played around with it a little bit, I think the problem is that with the sponge technique that Emil developed, you're working with a really stiff ink, much stiffer than what you guys are used to. And so I think the ink transfer to the paper very differently. And with the really stiff ink that I use with the foam emulsion, the emulsion is geared to accept it really well because the emulsion is so thick. But with the conventional pre-manufactured paper like Lewis paper or any of the others, as thin as the emulsion is, I think you need to have a thinner ink to like the normal process with the brushes that you guys do. So I think
what ink are you using?
I have all the stuff from Graphic Chemical and ink, but I've also got ink from Canfield and Hanco. I like the Hanco ink a lot. It seems to go on a little bit better.
Can I ask Michael and Dan, have you ever, with your coating techniques, have you ever used a Murray blade?
I use a homemade Maury blade with a glass rod in front of it. Because the problem I get with just glass rod coating is the emulsion squishes out to the sides and then it comes back in. And you get a very, very thick edges, especially at the top.
Yeah, you can't avoid that.
Yeah, but the blade completely eliminates that. You want me to show you my blade?
Yeah.
What is the blade? What is it called?
It's a Maury blade, and it's a trough mechanism with a slot in it that you pour the emulsion into, and it lays it out a little different than a normal glass rod would do it.
You need a few bucks in your pocket though to buy one.
Hold it up closer to the camera.
Okay, let me show you. It's about that thick. It's made from an old IKEA shelf. And this will coat about a 13.5-inch wide thing or process. You can't really see it, but here is a very thin, maybe 1/4-inch piece of wood, and it's all just glued. So it's sort of like this is the bottom, this is the top. So it's like a C shape that's closed off. There's no gap at the bottom, but there is like 2 millimeter thick, whatever, like wetsuit foam you can buy in sheets, and it's spray glued on with a rubber-based glue. It's all painted with porch paint, which is like a killer paint if you want to make a giant developing tray or a darkroom sink. So what this foam does is keeps the emulsion from spreading outside of it. It really is a watertight seal. And it also lifts the front of the blade up about 2 millimeters. So if I put the coating rod in front of it, the emulsion's only coming out this way as I pull back. The emulsion's being left behind, and then the glass rod is perfecting that height. And it works like a charm. And I saw an article online where someone had put a 3D model to make one of these, and I never got around to it, but I've got a table saw. So it's got about a 2 millimeter gap, and then which is taller than 6 wraps of tape that I use. So you set it on the paper, I have the glass rod ready, a little will start to leak out the gap, and then you draw down, and I get absolutely clean edges that way, which for me is nice because I really see inking differences if that puddle you know, comes out and comes back in. You can see in development and in fixing that there's like times as much emulsion there. So I was doing strips of angle iron with the foam on the bottom with like foam insulation. And even that was just, it was too messy. I was still getting pooling on the sides. So the little DIY blade it has been a really nice advance for me. So I've got this one, and I've got like an 8-inch one with a shorter rod for doing smaller tests. But there's somewhere online, someone's got a 3D model of, you know, to make one to do like 8x10s, but you know, you could, if you're good at SketchUp, or you can find some nerd that could just extend that model out, and you could have it 3D printed to whatever size you need somewhere. So,
Michael,
yes.
where does the glass rod go behind
Well,
the Mary blade?
if you think about, you know, I have this thing, and when it's laid on the paper, the emulsion goes in this well.
Yeah.
And it's sitting flat on the paper, but this skinny edge is about 2 millimeters higher than the paper. And so I just hold the rod, the glass rod with the tape right in front of that gap.
In front, right, okay.
I move it down as one unit. And
So in fact, the glass rod is behind the actual pulling action.
right,
Yeah,
it's just a second level of sort of smoothing for the
with you. Yeah, got you.
and man, I rinse it off with hot water. The paint doesn't come off. I assume at some point this foam and the spray glue will weaken up, but I'll just replace it at that point. So yeah, I tried it without the foam.
Commercial one's very, very expensive.
Yeah, and people don't like them. You know, people kind of complain. It's supposedly you can adjust the gap, but it's very hard. You know, when you turn the adjusting screws, it torques it a little, I guess, and it tilts it so you don't get it coating from side to side. And that was scraps in the garage. Or again, 3D printing would you know, let you make one at any size up to the limits of the 3D printing machines, I guess. Yeah, but that was a huge breakthrough.
So when I tried to do it, I was just using a brush to apply the emulsion. It sounds like I definitely was not applying enough emulsion if I was just simply painting it on.
If
Yeah,
you always, if you just single coat with a brush, you're not going to get enough contrast in your print.
And you're going to get paper texture that's lifted up
Brush
higher
marks,
than the emulsion. So, but when I do canvas, I use I built a darkroom spray booth, and I have a HVLP spray gun, and I just put on a respirator and spray this stuff, which is beautiful. It makes beautiful canvas. 3 or 4 coats. It's a very thin coating, and I do use the hardener for that. So
you actually sprayed the foam on your canvas?
mhm.
You're probably the only person ever who does that.
My poor wife. I saw there were threads on Fotrio. These guys were like, back in the mural days, you know, we would do this, but apparently what's really bad for you is the hardeners. And right now my biggest canvas is maybe 28 by 22. So they're not huge. It's a few seconds, and I have 2 vent fans, and I wear a respirator, but I have a heating pad, and I'm gonna get a sous vide eventually, because I really want to be doing these canvases at like 5 feet tall someday. But yeah, I've got a Harbor Freight spray rig, and I melt the emulsion and I pour it in, and
By the way, Michael, I bought the outdated foam emulsion from Freestyle, and I've had no problems with it whatsoever.
yeah, I did too. I just bought a liter of it myself.
Yeah.
Save 20
Do you
bucks.
get Rolly emulsion over there?
Yeah,
Or is it just
it's a
Floma?
little more expensive.
I think
Yeah. Have you used it?
I have once.
Yeah.
James Michelson, who will probably show up here on one of these calls here at some point, he bought some to try out, and I got the similar results as with Foma. Either one worked pretty well. We don't recommend liquid light.
Is the Rolly a multi-grade emulsion?
They make both types, a standard and a multi-grade. The multi-grade is more expensive. So,
Right.
but we don't recommend liquid light. So that doesn't, it works fine for making prints, but it doesn't work too well for doing bromoils.
And the stuff's got like no contrast.
Yeah.
It's so flat.
Right.
Well, yeah,
The
before
way
we,
they sell it is terrible. Like these long skinny bottles that you have to melt the whole bottle to use it.
Yeah.
And they, they say every time you heat the emulsion, you risk fogging it. And
Yeah.
well, I've tested it, but I save all my empty Foma bottles. So you just cut the top and bottom off with a box knife and
Yeah.
push the stuff into a Foma bottle and it'll work. But it's disappointing emulsion.
oh, before we wrap up, does anybody have any other questions for Tony's image or anything like that before we call it a day?
I'm good. I just want to say again, it's fantastic work. And thanks, Tony, for taking us through it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your encouragement. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing print. I would love to see that one in person if we could figure out a Bromoil circle at a thing. But
Hey, there's a great dive bar 2 blocks from my house, guys. Let's do it. But if you guys are interested, I'll do a little post. Maybe I can make a little diagram of that coating blade and kind of what I came up with. And it's so simple. You could 3D print or make one out of, I know people have made them by epoxying glass together and stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And then yeah, we'll figure out what my goal is to try to do these like once a month. Does that seem to work with everybody for timing wise, frequency?
Yeah.
It works for me, Austin. Thanks very much for organizing it.
Sure thing.